My name is Julian Hayes, and I'm 23 years old. 5 years ago, on the morning of my 18th birthday, my parents did something that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. I walked downstairs into our Seattle home expecting a small cake, or maybe just a simple happy birthday. Instead, I found my suitcases packed by the front door, and no explanation, just a door slammed shut on 18 years of trying to belong. I had no idea that 5 years later, those same parents would be standing outside the security gates of my $8 million estate in Austin, Texas, begging to be let in. I had no idea that the people who threw me away like yesterday's trash would one day realize they had discarded the only person who could save them from their own ruin. Before I tell you exactly what happened that day at the gate, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Let me take you back to the morning that changed everything, to a cold, rain-soaked November day in Seattle, and the last time my father ever looked at me as his son. Growing up, there were 2 sons in the Hayes house, but only one who mattered. My older brother Carter is 4 years older than me. He came out of the womb performing. He was the star athlete, the smooth talker, the boy who could charm any adult at any dinner party and make them laugh. My parents, Richard and Margaret Hayes, valued 2 things above all else: appearances and obedience. Carter delivered both flawlessly every single day, masking his complete lack of real ambition with a smile that could blind you. I was the quiet one, the one with his nose in a textbook while Carter held court at the dinner table. I wasn't rebellious, I wasn't difficult, I was simply invisible. I spent my childhood learning a very painful lesson. There's a difference between being forgotten and never being seen in the first place. I was wallpaper in my own family's house. Here is a small example of what my childhood actually looked like. When I was in the 10th grade, I won a statewide coding competition. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I spent 6 months programming a new organizational software, staying up until 3 a.m. every night while the rest of the house slept. The award ceremony was on a Friday evening. My parents had promised they would be there. I stood on that stage, holding my first place plaque, scanning the crowd of proud parents clapping for their kids. I looked at the 3rd row, where my parents were supposed to be sitting. The seats were empty. When I got home, the house was quiet. I found my mother in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. I asked her why they didn't come. She didn't even turn around to look at me. "Carter had a last-minute fraternity networking event, Julian," she said, her voice flat. "He needed your father and me to drive him and help him set up. You understand, sweetheart. Your brother's future career connections are more important than a high school computer club. More important than me." That's what she meant. That's what she always meant. Whenever I tried to point out the unfairness, my mother would cross her arms, tilt her head, and say, "Don't be so sensitive, Julian. Stop making everything about yourself." So I stopped complaining. I became smaller, quieter. I thought if I was agreeable enough, easy enough, invisible enough, maybe then I'd finally earn their love. But the truth was, I was always the acceptable sacrifice. Carter didn't just fail at life, he failed expensively. He had these brilliant startup ideas that required thousands of dollars in seed money, money my parents gladly pulled from their savings without a second thought. Every single venture collapsed within months. He partied away his college fund, wrecked 2 cars, and constantly needed to be bailed out of terrible apartment leases. But in my parents' eyes, Carter wasn't irresponsible. He was a misunderstood genius who just hadn't caught his big break yet. I, on the other hand, worked a grueling part-time job as a dishwasher at a local diner just to pay for my own clothes and school supplies. My father would watch me walk in late at night, smelling like bleach and cheap grease, and he would shake his head. "If you applied yourself like your brother," he would say, staring at his newspaper, "maybe you wouldn't have to scrub plates for minimum wage." He judged worth by charisma. He judged value by how well you could put on a show. I couldn't put on a show, so to him, I had no value. I was just the background character in the grand, dramatic play of Carter's life. but nothing could have prepared me for what they were willing to do to me when Carter's mistakes finally caught up with him. The breaking point arrived on my 18th birthday. It was a Tuesday in November, and the Seattle sky was a bruising, heavy gray, pouring freezing rain onto the city streets. I had just finished a grueling 10-hour shift at the local diner where I worked. My hands were raw from the industrial dish soap, my feet ached in my cheap sneakers, and my jacket was soaked through. But as I walked up the driveway to our house, a small, foolish part of me still held onto a shred of hope. I thought, maybe today will be different. Maybe they bought a small cake. Maybe they'll just say happy birthday and we can sit in the living room together. After all, turning 18 is supposed to be a milestone. I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped into the hallway. The house was dead quiet. There was no smell of dinner cooking, no music playing. I walked into the living room, brushing the rain out of my eyes, and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting perfectly side by the front door were two large, scuffed canvas suitcases. They were fully zipped, bulging at the seams. I recognized them immediately. They were the cheap ones my mother had bought years ago for a family vacation I was barely allowed to enjoy. On top of the suitcases was my winter coat. My parents were sitting in the living room. My father, Richard, was in his leather recliner, staring blankly at the muted television screen. My mother, Margaret, was sitting perfectly upright on the sofa, her hands neatly folded in her lap. Neither of them looked happy, but more devastatingly, neither of them looked apologetic. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling, my eyes darting frantically from the packed bags to their stone-cold faces. My father didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the television and said, his voice flat and arctic, "You're 18 now, Julian. You're legally an adult. It's time you figured life out on your own." "Figured life out?" I repeated, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, making it hard to breathe. "Dad, it's my birthday. It's pouring rain outside. I just got off a 10-hour shift. What are you talking about?" Margaret sighed, an exasperated, breathy sound, as if my confusion was a deliberate inconvenience to her evening. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were completely devoid of warmth. "Carter is moving back home, Julian. He lost his apartment downtown." She didn't mention that Carter lost his apartment because he had spent his rent money on throwing lavish parties and buying a new sports car he couldn't afford. She didn't mention that he had been evicted. "He's going through a very tough transition," my mother continued, her tone dropping into that sickeningly sweet, defensive cadence she always used when protecting Carter. "He needs a quiet, spacious area to set up his new gaming equipment and focus on his next business venture. Your bedroom is the largest one upstairs. We need it for him. Today." I stood there frozen, the freezing rain still dripping from my hair onto the hardwood floor. 18 years old. My own mother was evicting me on my birthday because my golden child brother needed my bedroom for a gaming setup. I had exactly $150 in my checking account. I didn't own a car. I had no other family in Seattle who would take me in against my parents' wishes. "Mom, I have nowhere to go," my voice cracked, the raw desperation leaking through. "It's freezing outside. Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" She crossed her arms and tilted her head. "Don't be dramatic, Julian. You always make everything a tragedy. You'll figure it out. You can stay with a friend." I had no friends who could take me in. I spent all my time working or studying, trying to be good enough for the two people sitting in front of me. I looked at my father. "Dad, please." Richard Hayes sat there, a man who commanded boardrooms and demanded respect from everyone he met, and he said absolutely nothing. He had a chance to choose me, to say one single word in my defense, to tell my mother that throwing their 18-year-old son into the freezing rain was wrong. But he chose silence. He always chose silence when it came to me. I picked up the handles of the suitcases. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a fit. I just looked at the people who were supposed to protect me, and I realized a horrifying truth. They weren't worried about me. They were relieved. They were finally getting rid of the reminder that they had a second son. I walked out the door. As I stepped onto the wet porch, my mother's voice followed me like a physical blow. "If you walk out that door, Julian, don't bother coming back when things get hard." I didn't slam it. I closed it gently behind me, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never open it again. Outside, the Seattle rain was unrelenting. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 cheap suitcases, $150 to my name, and the crushing weight of being completely unwanted. That was the last time I heard my mother's voice for 5 excruciating years. The first few weeks were a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated survival. The brutal reality of having no safety net hits you like a freight train when you have to choose between eating a hot meal or paying for a dry place to sleep. I spent my first 3 nights in a seedy, roach-infested motel by the highway. When my $150 ran out, I had to move to a local youth shelter. Have you ever slept in a room with 30 strangers, clutching your shoes to your chest so they don't get stolen in the middle of the night? The crushing loneliness of those nights was suffocating. Every time my phone buzzed with a spam email or a weather alert, my heart would leap, thinking maybe, just maybe, my mother had called to say she made a terrible mistake. But the phone never rang. Nobody came looking for me. No one was coming to save me. After a month of washing dishes and saving every single penny, I realized that staying in Seattle was going to kill me, if not physically, then mentally. The city was a graveyard of memories I needed to escape. I walked into a Greyhound bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Austin, Texas. It was the furthest place I could afford that had a booming tech industry, a place where no one knew my name, and more importantly, no one knew my family. I spent 40 hours on a bus, watching the American landscape shift from the rainy evergreens of Washington to the dry, sprawling heat of Texas. I had my suitcase jammed between my knees, and I used the long, quiet hours to mourn the family I never really had. Hey, I want to pause here for a second. If you're watching this and you've ever been blamed for causing drama just because you asked to be treated fairly, I see you. I want to know, have you ever been made the scapegoat in your family? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Type your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one, and we are building a community of people who understand exactly what this feels like. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. Now, let me tell you how everything changed and how I built the life that my parents would eventually try to steal. Arriving in Austin was like landing on another planet. The heat was immediate, wrapping around me the moment I stepped off the bus. I found a bed in a crowded hostel downtown that smelled constantly of bleach and cheap noodles. I had no credit history, no references, and no emergency contacts. On every single job application I filled out, when it asked for next of kin, I drew a blank line. I got a job working as a night shift janitor at a mid-sized tech firm. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I emptied trash cans, scrubbed toilets, and vacuumed conference rooms where people made more in a day than I did in a month. But here is the thing about being completely invisible. People leave their whiteboards full of code, their architectural flowcharts, and their half-finished algorithms right out in the open. During the day, I slept for 4 hours in my cramped hostel bed. The rest of the time, I sat in the public library, teaching myself software architecture and advanced coding on a battered, secondhand laptop with a screen that flickered if you tilted it wrong. I didn't have a college degree, I didn't have a fancy tutor like Carter had, but I had something much more dangerous. I had absolute, pure desperation. I had the fire of a young man who refused to ever be thrown out into the rain again. Months turned into a year. My life was a relentless, punishing grind. There were no movie montages, no inspiring background music, just the smell of industrial floor cleaner, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the burning in my eyes as I stared at lines of code until the sun came up over the Texas hills. Then came the night that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I was emptying the trash in the corner office of the firm's lead systems architect, a tough, brilliant man named Mr. Sterling. He was notorious for being uncompromising and demanding. It was 3 a.m., and he was still at his desk, rubbing his temples, staring angrily at a massive data routing algorithm on his whiteboard that he had been trying to fix for a week. I was quietly replacing his trash bag when I looked up at the board. The numbers and variables made sense to me in a way human relationships never did. Before I could stop myself, the words slipped out of my mouth. "Your routing loop is redundant," I said quietly, pointing to the third quadrant of the board. "If you restructure the secondary node, it bypasses the bottleneck completely. It'll cut your processing time in half." Mr. Sterling froze. He slowly turned around in his leather chair, staring at the 19-year-old kid holding a dripping trash bag. He looked at the board, then back at me. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask me what a janitor knew about systems architecture. He just handed me a dry erase marker. "Show me," he said. I took the dry erase marker from his hand. My fingers, rough and blistered from months of wringing out industrial mops, trembled just slightly. But the moment the tip of the marker touched the whiteboard, the trembling stopped. I didn't just fix his routing loop, I completely re-architected the data flow. I mapped out a secondary sequence that bypassed the bottleneck and reduced the server load by 40%. I wrote lines of code and drew structural diagrams until the board was entirely covered in blue ink. When I finally stepped back, the silence in the office was deafening. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly, walked over to the board, and traced his finger along the flow lines I had just drawn. He stared at it for a full 2 minutes. Then he turned to me, looking at my faded janitor's uniform and then back at my face. "You're not a janitor, Julian," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You're a systems architect who just happens to be holding a trash bag." The very next morning, I wasn't emptying trash cans anymore. Mr. Sterling marched into the HR department, demanded they rip up my janitorial contract, and personally hired me as a junior software developer. He didn't care that I didn't have a fancy degree from an Ivy League school like my brother Carter did. He didn't care about my pedigree. He cared about my hunger. Mr. Sterling became the mentor I so desperately needed, and in many ways, the father figure my own dad had completely failed to be. Under his guidance, I didn't just learn how to code better, I learned how to value myself. Over the next 3 years, I worked with a kind of relentless obsession. I poured all the pain, the rejection, and the cold memory of that rainy 18th birthday into my work. By the time I turned 21, I had designed a revolutionary cybersecurity and data encryption algorithm. With Mr. Sterling as my primary investor and co-founder, we launched our own tech startup. We secured contracts with some of the biggest financial institutions in the country. My algorithm became the industry standard for securing cloud-based banking data. At age 22, a massive tech conglomerate approached us. They didn't just want to license the software, they wanted to buy the entire company. The acquisition went through for tens of millions of dollars. My share alone was enough to ensure that I would never have to worry about the price of anything ever again. I bought an $8 million estate nestled high in the Austin Hills. It had sprawling manicured lawns, a massive infinity pool, and heavy iron security gates at the end of a long, sweeping driveway. But the most expensive and valuable thing I acquired wasn't the mansion, the cars, or the bank accounts. It was the silence. It was the absolute, unshakable peace of finally being free from the people who had spent 18 years making me feel completely worthless. I built a new family, a chosen family. I hosted Sunday dinners at my estate with my co-founders, my colleagues, and Mr. Sterling. We laughed, we argued over silly things, we shared our lives. When I spoke at my own dinner table, people actually stopped to listen. Nobody told me I was being dramatic. Nobody asked me to shrink myself to make room for someone else's ego. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't performing for love. I was simply loved. But while I was building an empire in Texas, the gilded cage my parents had built in Seattle was completely falling apart. I learned all of this much later, piece by piece, but I need to tell you now so you understand the sheer audacity of what they were about to do. Carter, the golden child, the misunderstood genius for whom I was thrown into the freezing rain, had finally hit a wall he couldn't charm his way over. He had convinced my parents to back his most ambitious project yet, a luxury real estate investment firm. But Carter didn't know the first thing about real estate, finance, or hard work. He only knew how to spend money to look like he was making money. He leased expensive downtown office space. He bought a Porsche as a company vehicle. He threw lavish networking parties. When the initial seed money dried up, my parents, completely blinded by their devotion to their perfect son, took out a massive second mortgage on our family home in Seattle. They co-signed personal loans. They drained their retirement accounts. Within 2 years, the entire venture collapsed like a house of cards. The banks came calling. The creditors filed lawsuits. My father, Richard Hayes, the man who cared more about appearances than his own flesh and blood, had to declare bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the Seattle house, the same house I had been evicted from. They lost everything. Carter, now 27 years old, was unemployed, heavily in debt, and living in a cheap rented apartment with the parents he had successfully bankrupted. Being the golden child, it turns out, is its own kind of tragedy. You never develop the calluses needed to survive the real world because someone is always there to cushion your fall, until there are no cushions left. For 5 entire years, not one person in my family had ever reached out to me, not a single phone call, not an email, not even a simple Google search to see if I had survived that first winter. They were so fiercely committed to the narrative that I was a failure, a troubled kid who ran away, that they never even bothered to look. Until one random Tuesday, when Carter, desperate for someone to bail him out of his financial ruin, finally typed my name into a search engine. He wasn't looking for his brother. He was looking for an ATM. What he found instead was a recent profile on me in a major business magazine. The headline read, "Rising Tech Star, How 23-year-old Julian Hayes Built and Sold a Cybersecurity Empire." The article detailed my company's multi-million-dollar acquisition. It featured a high-resolution photo of me standing in front of my Austin estate. It mentioned my position as an industry leader. I can only imagine the absolute shock, the sickening drop in their stomachs when they realized the son they had thrown away like garbage was now worth more than their entire combined bloodline. They didn't call to apologize. They didn't write a letter begging for forgiveness for the 5 years of traumatic silence. Instead, they packed their bags, bought plane tickets with whatever credit they had left, and flew to Texas. It was a perfect Sunday afternoon. The Texas sun was golden and warm. I was hosting a barbecue in the backyard of my mansion. The air smelled of smoked brisket and mesquite wood. Mr. Sterling was there, arguing playfully with my lead developer about a football game. The pool water was sparkling. I was holding a glass of iced tea, looking around at my chosen family, feeling incredibly lucky. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the security guard stationed at the front gates of my estate. "Mr. Hayes," the guard's voice came through the speaker, sounding slightly confused. "I apologize for the interruption, sir, but there are 2 people at the main gate, an older couple. They're demanding to be let in." A cold prickle ran down the back of my neck. "Who are they?" I asked, setting my glass down on the patio table. "They say their names are Richard and Margaret Hayes," the guard replied. "They claim they are your parents. And they say it's an absolute family emergency." The world stopped spinning. The laughter of my friends, the music playing from the outdoor speakers, the rustling of the wind in the trees, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. For 3 agonizing seconds, I wasn't a 23-year-old multimillionaire standing on the patio of my own estate. I was an 18-year-old boy standing in the freezing Seattle rain with 2 cheap suitcases, listening to a door slam shut in my face. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing myself back into the present moment. I looked at the life I had built. I looked at the people who actually loved me. "I'll be right down," I told the guard. I didn't tell my friends what was happening. I just excused myself, put my hands in my pockets, and began the long walk down my sweeping, manicured driveway toward the massive iron gates. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel scared. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling into my bones. The ghost of my past had finally shown up at my doorstep, and it was time to show them exactly who I had become. The walk down my sweeping, manicured driveway felt like walking through a time machine. With every step I took away from my backyard barbecue and toward the front gates, the Texas heat seemed to fade, replaced by the phantom chill of a Seattle rainstorm. Through the heavy iron bars of the security gate, I finally saw them. Richard and Margaret Hayes. They didn't look like the towering, authoritative figures who had casually evicted me from their lives 5 years ago. They looked older, grayer, and remarkably fragile. My father, a man who had once worn bespoke suits and boardroom arrogance like a second skin, was standing in slacks that looked a size too big for him. My mother, who had always valued appearances above oxygen, was clutching a worn leather purse, her careful makeup unable to hide the deep lines of exhaustion and panic etched around her eyes. I stopped about 5 feet from the gate. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't scowl. I just put my hands in my pockets and looked at them. My mother saw me first. Her eyes widened and a practiced, desperate smile stretched across her face. She reached her hands through the iron bars, her voice pitching up into a performance of maternal relief that was so fake it made my chest ache. "Julian! Oh, Julian, sweetheart!" she cried out. "Look at you! We missed you so much! Why didn't you tell us where you were? Why didn't you call?" I didn't step closer. I looked at her hands reaching through the bars, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, just a profound, echoing emptiness. "You had my number for 5 years, Mom," I said. My voice was eerily calm, steady in a way that seemed to unnerve them more than shouting would have. "You knew exactly where you left me. You left me on the porch in the freezing rain." Her smile flickered, the mask slipping just a fraction before she forced it back into place. "Julian, please. You know how complicated things were back then. Family is family, right? We have to stick together." She dropped her voice into that familiar, manipulative cadence. "We've been going through a really hard time, Julian. Carter made some bad investments. We lost the house. Your father had to declare bankruptcy. We just need a place to stay for a little while, and maybe a small loan to help Carter get his new business off the ground. You owe us that much." There was that word again. Away. The currency of the Hayes family. "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. My father stepped forward, his face flushing with the ghost of his old temper. He gripped the iron bars. "After everything this family has done for you, you can't even help your own brother?" he demanded, trying to summon the authority he used to wield so effortlessly. "You're living in a mansion, Julian. You have millions of dollars. You're going to let your own mother and father sleep in a rented apartment while you have all of this? You are embarrassing this family. You didn't protect me, and you certainly didn't raise me," I cut him off. My voice didn't rise, but it sliced through the warm Texas air like a scalpel. "You erased me. Every family photo where you pretended I didn't exist. Every Thanksgiving where you ignored me. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. I spent 18 years trying to earn a place in your family, and what did I get? 2 cheap suitcases and a slammed door on my 18th birthday." "That's not fair," my mother started, real tears finally brimming in her eyes. "We did the best we could. Carter needed us." "And I didn't?" I asked, looking directly into her eyes. "I didn't need you when I was sleeping in a youth shelter. I didn't need you when I was washing dishes until my hands bled. You didn't come here today to see a son. You came to see an ATM. You came to see a bank account." "Julian, please," my father whispered, his voice finally breaking. The anger drained out of him, leaving only the terrified reality of a man who realized he had sold his only lifeline for a golden child who couldn't save him. "We're your parents. You can't just replace us." "I didn't replace you." I looked at him evenly. "You abandoned me first. You chose Carter every single time, every single day for 18 years. You threw me away, and I just picked myself up and built a life without you." My mother was openly sobbing now, her hands still reaching through the bars. Please, Julian, help us. We have nothing left. Help me. The two words they always used when they needed something. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we were wrong. Just, help me. I stepped closer to the gate. I looked at the people who had given me life and then done everything in their power to make me feel like I didn't deserve to live it. I need you to understand something, I said softly. I don't hate you. I've made peace with who you are. You're not villains. You're just people who couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved. You are people who chose your own comfort over fairness. People who let one sun become invisible so the other could shine. My mother's chin trembled. Julian. But I have also made peace with who I am, I continued, standing taller. And who I am is someone who deserves to be chosen, not as a backup plan. Not as a last resort when the golden child bankrupts you. Chosen first. I turned to the security guard standing silently inside his booth. These people are trespassing, I said calmly. If they don't leave the perimeter in exactly 2 minutes, call the police. Julian, wait, please, my mother screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls of my estate. I didn't wait. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't need their permission to leave. I turned my back on the heavy iron gates and began the long walk back up the driveway. Behind me, I could hear my father trying to calm my mother down, their voices fading into the distance. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the rush of revenge. What I felt was peace. The absolute, unshakable, quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally stopped negotiating with people who never valued the deal. When I reached the backyard, the barbecue was still in full swing. The smell of smoked brisket hung in the air. The music was playing. My friends, my colleagues, my chosen family were all exactly where I left them. Mr. Sterling walked over to me, holding a fresh glass of iced tea. He handed it to me, his sharp eyes studying my face for a moment. He didn't ask what happened at the gate. He just clinked his glass against mine. Everything okay, Julian? I looked around at the people laughing by the pool, the people who had pulled up a chair for me when I had nothing. Yeah, I smiled, taking a sip. Everything is perfect. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It's survival. It's choosing yourself when no one else will. Family isn't blood. Family isn't an obligation you are born into. Family isn't people who share your DNA but treat you like a burden until you become useful to them. Family is the people who show up, the people who see you struggling and invite you to sit at their table, the people who don't ask you to shrink yourself to make room for their egos. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it, and then I spent 5 years learning what love actually looks like, not from the family I was born into, but from the family that chose me. If the people who are supposed to love you can't do that, if they've proven over and over again that you will always come last, you have the right to walk away. You have the right to build your own table. That's not drama. That's not being difficult. That's just living your life without people who don't deserve a seat in it. I found my people, and I hope, with all my heart, that if you're watching this and you're sitting at a table where you are invisible, you find the courage to walk away and find your people too. You deserve to be chosen. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If my story touched you in any way, if it gave you even a little bit of courage to set your own boundaries, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It really helps more people find these stories and realize they aren't alone. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and we are building a community of people who truly understand. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen.